Welcome to Community Watch, and today we're having a fascinating conversation with Scott Aikman, professor at Georgia Highlands College. We're going to talk about the election. Stay tuned. Community Watch starts now.
Welcome to Community Watch. I am very happy today to have with us an expert in the political world, which we could use more of. And we're hoping Greg will be joining us shortly. He was delayed at work unexpectedly, but we could not wait to begin our conversation with Professor of Political Science and History from Georgia Highlands, Scott Aikman. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Glad to be here. And another historical election, maybe one of the most historical elections in the books.
It has been such, well, for me, someone who is not watching it with the same expertise that you have, just one bizarre thing after another. But I want to ask first about just the length of time that counting votes seems to be taking. And not in just one place, but in many places. Why is that happening so much?
Well, I think there's a variety of factors. I think there's a number of reasons. And I think the first and most obvious, this is 2020, so let's blame it on COVID. And I say that not to be funny, but I think everyone's had to back up and come up with a plan B that they've had to execute in order to count votes, in order to even execute the election period. Look at the expansion of early voting so many states has had, and all the restrictions that have been lifted in terms of absentee ballots and whatnot, in terms of getting them in. So I think when you change how people vote, that's also going to impact how you're going to count those votes. And so, were a number of locations understaffed? Were there technology issues? Were there issues that maybe you couldn't use the equipment that you're used to because this election's changed and you're going to have to switch and use something different? And if so, that has, I think, impacted the process as well. Another thing that I think is really hurt us in terms of being able to say definitively who the winner is, and this is going to sound odd on the heels of the 2016 election, was this election was so close. You look at the raw vote between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, it was closer than this election. You look at the electoral vote, it was, maybe not quite as close. But I think that another thing is we had more people participating. I think that the COVID, different scenarios played out in how we voted and how we counted it, and then just the closeness of the vote.
Well, I know I guess the election that I think most about is the Bush-Gore election, and I can't even name the year now.
2000.
But all of that drama seemed focused on, if I remember correctly, on Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was a paper ballot system.
Yes.
So now, I guess in we're automated almost everywhere except for the mail-in ballot. So I guess the huge number of absentee and mail-in ballots had a real impact here in a number of ways. So I guess I'm curious why those votes were not counted as they came in instead of all here at the end.
All right. I think that you have to look at it on a state by state by state basis. It is a federal election, but it's also a state election. There's also local elections going on. And so, the state and local governments put these ballots together, and, COVID has impacted, I think, everyone's operating budget. And so depending on the locale, they may or may not have a budget to start counting early. Their budget might entail that they have to wait until, the day of the election. And to be honest, some state laws require that counting start on such and such date and conclude on such and such date. And, I don't think anyone had any state laws prior to 2020 that took a pandemic into consideration. And so a lot of things I think have had to be adjusted on the fly. And, when you have an opportunity to make corrections on the fly, or if you really haven't planned this event out to the best, there's an opportunity for mishaps.
Yeah.
And I think, they say what the average absentee ballot takes about 2 minutes to process. And so one person is only going to be able to process 30 of those an hour. You have a few thousand absentee ballots, and you're looking at needing to bring in a considerable staff to process those properly. And, I think the pandemic has, put a multiplier of 10, 12 on the absentee ballots, depending on which area you're looking at compared to previous years.
Well, as we are talking today, and this is the 9th of November, I believe, and tomorrow will be the 1 week anniversary of the election day. We still have 4 states that are not declared for the Electoral College. But before we started today, you were pointing out that there are really quite a few races that are still too close to call in different categories, which I didn't even realize for Congress. Is that right?
Yes. Depending on which site you go to, depending on, whose information you're looking at, anywhere from 18 to 24 House races have yet to be called. I don't think it's going to change, who controls that chamber. I think that chamber is safely in the Democrats' hands. But, I think it looks like the Democrats for now have lost a few seats, but we don't know who's ultimately gained, who's ultimately lost, and how much. And then, of course, Georgia has our 2 Senate seats, and how those will play out will determine the balance of power in that chamber as well.
Yeah. Well, I know that just to have Georgia be in the conversation in a national election is, I don't remember the last time that occurred. It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah. In terms of Georgia going blue presidentially, that hasn't occurred since Clinton ran in '92. And if that's what we're talking about, I'll be honest with you. Georgia going to Biden, to me, is more impressive in 2020 than it was when Clinton did it in '92. And that's not a dig on President Clinton, but he had considerable help. If you remember, we had that third-party candidate, Ross Perot, who would have pulled more conservative votes, I believe, than he would, liberal or Democratic-leaning votes. To be honest with you, this victory that Biden has achieved in Georgia, I think, is more along the lines of a victory like Carter had, without help, so to speak, back in 1980. And so I've had to sit back and look at this, and I was having conversations with students last week in class about the changing demographics of our state, and certainly how our state has changed demographically since President Clinton. And I'm talking about not just immigration, but really migration.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is my wife is from Gwinnett County, and we met in college and whatnot. And, no one in her family lives in Gwinnett County anymore. They've all moved away. And so, except one of her aunts. And her aunt says it's really hard to find someone from Gwinnett County. That if you go out and you go shopping in Gwinnett County, you meet somebody from New Jersey or someone from California or someone who's moved here and immigrated from another country. And I think that the demographics of Metro Atlanta, especially on the north side, have changed considerably. And I think that's helped Biden achieve victory. I don't think that many native Georgians have changed their political views. I think certainly a few thousand have. But I think that the influx of migration in our state has made a huge impact.
Now, I know that there was a concern about, it was actually, there were actually accusations of voter suppression in the governor's election. Has there been with this election, have a lot more people registered to vote than previously? Is that a significant number?
I wouldn't say it's anything abnormal in terms of new first-time voters and folks who have just simply registered to vote. In fact, to be honest with you, and I haven't looked at all the raw numbers from across the country or even for the state, but I think we had more new registered voters participate in 2008 as a percentage of the overall voting public than we have so far in 2020. In other words, I think, when President Obama ran in 2008, it excited more first-time voters than either one of the candidates in 2020. And so as a percentage of voters in 2008, we had a higher percentage of first-time voters than I think we're going to know in 2020. I can't give you a 2020 number because they're still counting them, right?
Yeah.
But I don't see anything that's abnormal there with first-time voters, to be honest with you. And I might be wrong, but I don't think that's the case.
Well, I see that Greg has been able to join us. Greg, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Doc. It's always a pleasure. Scott, I did have a question though. Is Georgia blue, or is this a one-off?
Well, I'm not going to say it's a one-off by any stretch of the imagination. Although it looks like the Democrats may have lost some seats in the House of Representatives nationally, they didn't lose any seats in Georgia. They gained. They gained one. Now, this is impressive to me, considering that they gained one back in 2018 when Lucy McBath picked up the 6th congressional district. That district was drawn, and I don't mean this ugly, but by a Republican-controlled Georgia state legislature for a Republican to win. And there's nothing illegal going on there. To the victors go the spoils. The state legislatures get to draw the congressional districts. So, California's districts are drawn to the advantage of Democrats, and Georgia's, districts are drawn to the advantage of Republicans. But what really, really impressed me is that the congressional district, the 7th district, which is based in Gwinnett County primarily, has turned blue in this 2020 election. And so, the way the state was originally drawn up, there were going to be, of the 14 districts, House districts here in Georgia, 10 were going to be majority Republican districts, and 4 were going to be majority minority districts, but what we would call safe Democratic districts. And now it's an 8-6 split. So the Democrats have picked up 2 districts that were drawn for Republicans by Republicans. And if I can't say safely that there's a shift to the blue, I don't know what else I would call it. Those are metropolitan districts, but I think that also reflects the changing demographics in our state as well. Georgia is shifting blue, absolutely.
Well, we need to take a break here, so stay with us. We have a lot more discussion to come. We'll be back after this.
For 50 years, Georgia Highlands College has been a community that takes charge. At GHC, we have a mission to provide access to an outstanding education, meeting the career needs of the region, and helping our communities thrive. Every student we graduate becomes a celebration we never forget. We are more than Chargers. We are Chargers taking charge for 50 years and beyond.
Welcome back to Community Watch. We're having a conversation with political science and history professor Scott Akemon from Georgia Highlands about the election. And Scott, I know this is a question that has come up in several presidential elections in the last couple of decades, I guess, but is the Electoral College still worth keeping? I mean, is it causing more trouble than it's worth? I mean, the popular vote this time around, I believe Biden has the popular vote by close to 5 million. Why do we need an Electoral College?
Well, the founding fathers wanted it in place so that basically there'd be a second filter to protect the American public from itself. And not to be cute or anything, but the average voter can be swept away by the spirit of the moment and not the substance of the moment. And so the Electoral College was really put in place to filter, to make sure that we haven't overstepped our common sense, so to speak. And maybe the time for that has come and gone. I know that I really like the way Maine and Nebraska award their electoral votes. And so, on a personal note, I would love to see the Electoral College change to where all 50 states award their electoral votes the same way as Maine and Nebraska. And that is, if you win the congressional district, you get the electoral vote for that congressional district. If you win the state, then you get those 2 electoral votes for the whole state. And I think if we did that, that would be more of a mirror image of the popular vote than the current 48 state winner take all. But I do think that maybe we shouldn't get rid of that very last filter. I know for the first time I can say in my life, I know an elector personally, and I know that elector is 100%, dedicated to that party's nominee, and that they're going to vote just like that state. They're not going to change. I'm not really worried about an unfaithful elector any longer changing the outcome of an election.
Yeah, and I could be wrong, but the problem I have with the Electoral College is that if you take a state like Wyoming, it has 2 senators, and you take a state like California, over 40 million people. Wyoming may have not even 1 million, I don't think. The fact that both states only have 2 senators, a state with 40 million people and a state with, let's say, 1 million people, somehow it just doesn't seem fair that those states both have the exact same amount of say-so when you look at the sheer number. And I know we just can't change things, it just happenstance, but clearly that's when the Constitution was written and what we have now. That's why the Constitution is so great, because we have been able to amend it in time. But 40 million compared to 1 million to me just seems like the math just doesn't work for me.
Well, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't argue that point. The only thing I could tell you to help you sleep at night is Wyoming has but 1 member of the House and California has 53. And so you go add those 2 senators to those numbers, and California's got 55 electoral votes. Wyoming's going to only have 3. But you're absolutely right. Proportionally speaking, those 2 Senate seats give Wyoming a louder voice. But again, I think that was part of the design to bring some of the states into the Constitution, out of the Articles of Confederation, that you couldn't have brought in if you didn't guarantee them equality in the upper chamber, which is the Senate. Of course, the byproduct is now those folks have, an unfair proportional representation in the Electoral College. And not so much this election, it looks, but you go back to the election 4 years ago, those electoral votes that represent the Senate could very well have been the difference, and probably were.
Yeah.
Only way to correct it, though, is to amend the Constitution, which is not going to be done anytime soon. And I'm not saying that to be cute. If you look at the numbers and how close the House is and how close the Senate is, to get those folks to work together to pass anything by 2/3 margin and then get 3/4 of the states to agree, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And that bothers me as a nation, for us to be that far apart.
Y'all might have discussed this earlier, but that leads me to my next point. When we look at the split, both President-elect Biden and President Trump both received over 70 million votes. And that tells me we are a nation divided. I'm just concerned that if something doesn't change, I just don't see America progressing, I guess, in a positive spin, in a positive light. If something don't change, it's almost to the point, I feel like, me personally, that it's almost us against them. And either side is really willing to budge. And it just seems like the chasm just continues to grow. And
Well,
that could be me, but it just seems like we're just locked.
Well, I can't tell you that your feelings are wrong, and I can't tell you that we've not gone through similar periods in our nation's history. I tell my students in class, one of the things that absolutely scares me about a presidential election is how it can change history in ways you never thought of. And the students are like, what do you mean? Well, I mean, it was the election of 1876 that brought Reconstruction to an end. And that was an election where the president who won the candidate who won the popular vote didn't win the Electoral College. And America changed forever because they made a deal. And the deal was, we'll let your guy be president, but in return, Reconstruction ends. And that changed America for well over 100. Well, I mean, it still impacts America to this day, that decision. And John and I were talking earlier about the 2000 election between Gore and Bush. There's another incredibly close election. The hanging chads determine who's going to be president of the United States. And look how divided we were as a nation. I mean, we were extremely, extremely divided as a nation 20 years ago. And the sad thing is, it took 9/11 to bring us back to being Americans and to pull us away from being Democrats or Republicans. And I feel like today we're as divided as we were in 2000, if not worse. And I hope and pray, fingers crossed, that we don't have to have another national disaster to bring us together to where we're Americans first, and then we might be a Democrat or we might be a Republican. But I agree. I reflect your sentiments. I'm very concerned about the division in the country.
I want to bring up something that Jeff Brown let us know about with our two Republican incumbent senators accusing the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, of mismanaging the election and the vote count and allowing for illegal votes, and asking for him to step down. He has said that he's not going to do that, but is there, do we even know yet? Is there any real proof that there have been illegal votes of significant number?
I've not seen it. I've heard all kinds of great stories. I've not heard, or I should say, I've not seen any evidence. But I think this goes back to 2018. Greg made mention earlier, Stacey Abrams, right? Or maybe you did, John, I forget. But, Stacey Abrams claimed to have won the governorship in 2018 and that voter suppression played a role. So let's think about this. How many counties in Georgia are controlled by Democrats? In other words, how many counties in Georgia and which counties choose the election officials, the Democrats choose them, versus the Republican counties? So if you're a democratically controlled county and you believe that voter suppression played a role in Ms. Abrams not winning the governorship in 2018, how hard are you going to work in 2020 to make sure that doesn't happen to Joe Biden, to make sure that doesn't happen to John Ossoff or to Reverend Warnock? All right. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's fraud. That doesn't mean that people are cheating. Maybe you just actually did your job better than it's ever been done before and you're efficient. How's the other side going to see that? And again, I think that COVID and a lack of budget have played a huge role in how everyone has had the ability to handle these absentee ballots and these write-in ballots. How much payroll do you have? How much can you spend? Not counting electronically, but by hand. And, we can say what we want to about the Secretary of State, but he doesn't control all 159 counties in terms of the election board officials.
Scott, I'm curious, now that what you're talking about, Stacey Abrams' claim, I don't know if it was ever substantiated. I know she made those claims, but I don't know if there was ever any proof that there was it could have been proved. But in our history, have we ever had a president that have claimed such fraud in an election such as this?
Well, we've certainly had people who didn't win the presidency claim it. I can't say that there's ever been anything on a large scale in terms of voter fraud in a presidential election unless we go back to the election of 1876. And, first of all, if we're going to do that, I want to thank Florida for actually counting ballots correctly in 2020, because it seems like every time there has been a presidential dispute, 2000 and 1876, Florida has played a key role. But, in 1876, there was absolutely no doubt that there was massive voter fraud. It just depended on where you went throughout the nation, but especially in the South. In Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, it was rampant, the fraud. I don't think that we've had obvious voter fraud. I don't, if it has occurred, it has been very cleverly done. I think it may be possibly even at an IT level. I don't really know, but I do know that fraud occurs in every election. But what we don't know is to what degree has it occurred. Has it changed the outcome of this election? I don't think so. But if it has changed the outcome of this election, then we've had fraud on a massive, massive scale. And that doesn't mean that one person counting ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, changed the outcome. That means that ballots across the state in various areas have been impacted. And again, that would only change our results. How then, is Biden president, if that's what we're talking about? That means that it's had to occur in other states like Nevada or Pennsylvania. And of course, look how many lawsuits we have out there right now. I've never known a lawsuit to change an outcome of a presidential election. And I think I was telling John earlier, if it was anybody but Donald Trump, I'd tell you, put a fork in it, it's over. But Donald Trump is not going to let this thing go. And until the Electoral College votes, I'm not going to say anybody's president officially, because, Trump's not going to let go of it. He's not going to concede. Once the Electoral College votes, then I'm happy to say we have a president-elect.
Well, Scott, we're running out of time here, but I want to thank you so much for being with us, and we may have to have you back as things develop to talk some more. But thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. And anytime, it's always a pleasure to join you two gentlemen.
And thank everyone for being with us. We'll see you next time on Community Watch.